My son, for Christmas, I think not this past Christmas, a year ago, gave me this little book. Nice cover, really nice cover called The Valley of Vision. It's a series of prayers by the Puritans back in the 1600s, 1700s, the ancient Puritans. And there was one prayer here that I just really loved, and I thought maybe I'd just share it this morning as our prayer to start the day. Is that okay?
Yeah.
This is on divine mercies. Divine mercies. Thou, eternal God, thine is surpassing greatness, unspeakable goodness, superabundant grace. I can as soon count the sands of ocean's lip, whatever that means, as number thy favors towards me. I know but a part, but that part exceeds all praise. I thank thee for personal mercies, a measure of health, preservation of body, comforts of house and home, sufficiency of food and clothing, continuance of mental powers, my family, their mutual help and support, the delights of domestic harmony and peace, the seats that now fill what might have been vacant, my country, church, the Bible, faith. But oh, how I mourn my sin, ingratitude, vileness, the days that add to my guilt, the scenes that witness my offending tongue. All things in heaven, earth around, within, without, condemn me. The sun which sees my misdeeds, the darkness which is light to thee, the cruel accuser who justly charges me, the good angels who have been provoked to leave me, thy countenance which scans my secret sins, thy righteous law, thy holy word, my sin-soiled conscience, my private and public life, my neighbors, myself, all write dark things against me. I deny them not, frame no excuse, but confess, Father, I have sinned, yet still I live and fly repenting to thy outstretched arms. Thou wilt not cast me off, for Jesus brings me near. Thou wilt not condemn me, for he died in my stead. Thou wilt not mark my mountains of sin, for he leveled all, and his beauty covers my deformities. Oh my God, I bid farewell to sin by clinging to his cross, hiding in his wounds, and sheltering in his side. Amen.
What's the name of that book?
The Valley of Vision.
The Valley of Vision.
I have it.
Okay, well, I recently found another book in our library down at Suncoast called The Gifts of the Jews. And I was familiar with this thesis that he propounds in the book, one of the main theses anyway. And I thought, it might be good to kind of share this with you guys, and in your discussions maybe with other people about the Bible and what's significant. This is something that's really, I think, interesting, and how important it is to think about what we have written. And when I say we, I don't just mean Christians or Jews or Christians, but the influence that they have had on the whole Western world, and the way that we and the rest of particularly the Western world looks at reality. And I'll illustrate with something. Just this past week, the chaplain down there, Suncoast, was having a little discussion group based around a book by Max Lucado called "We Can Get Through" or "You Can Get Through This," and he's kind of doing a follow-up on us getting to the tail end of COVID with all of the problems and the sickness and the death and the restrictions that we had to put up with COVID and the effect that it's had on us. And just kind of, and this is a book by Max Lucado where he talks about the times of trouble and what God is doing in our lives through times of trouble, right? And we kept in that discussion group, they kept talking about hope, that we're going to get through this, meaning that there's a better day, there's something to look forward to now, and this, and as a devil's advocate, you know me, I said, what basis do we have for looking forward to anything? What basis do you have for hope?
Future.
There's only one hope.
God.
That's the Lord.
The only hope left is that we can one day be with Jesus Christ. Or maybe our grandchildren will grow up to be nice kids. And
why do you think you're going to go be with Jesus Christ?
Oh, because I believe that He died for my sins.
Well, what basis do you have for believing that?
The Bible says so.
What is the basis of hope in general? What basis do you have for hoping anything in about, let's say, a week from today, a year from now, or in eternity?
Promises of God.
Yeah, faith in
Is
God.
it wishful thinking?
He's been faithful.
No.
That's God has been
It's
faithful
based
with
on a
His
promise, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Hope,
10:23.
hope is based on a promise. If you loan somebody some money, and they may put it in writing and sign their name, or they may just tell you, I need $20. Can you loan me $20 till payday, and I'll pay you back on payday? That's a promise, isn't it? So you hope that on payday you're going to get your $20 back.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes your hope is disappointed in men, isn't it? This guy who promised you he's going to pay you, he may or may not pay you. Right.
Buy some beer with that money. Sorry.
But the basis of your hope is just this guy's promise, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
That's really the only basis of your hope, is somebody's promise. And in this case, of course, our hope about really a better future for ourselves or for this world or for salvation, our hope in salvation is based on a promise. Right?
That's why I said Hebrews 10:23. Let us hold fast the professions of our hope without wavering, for He whose promise is faithful.
There you go.
That's my verse.
Right.
That's my life verse.
Yeah. We do talk, Paul talks about the three things: faith, hope, and love. And of course he says the greatest of these is love.
Right.
That's the pinnacle of, because God himself is love, and to love God and to love your neighbor, that's the pinnacle of of life. You could, and of course faith is important. No, because without faith you can't please God, right?
Right.
But hope, we don't. How many times do you hear a sermon on hope? You hear sermons on faith and you hear sermons on love. But I think hope is a kind of neglected topic. But anyway, so hope is based on a promise. But did you ever stop to think about that? That it's easy for people in this world to talk about a better future. We're always hoping, for example, when we have an election, that somehow if we can get the right people in office, that that maybe things will get better. Maybe it'll resolve inflation. Or we're hoping, there'll be an end to this war in Ukraine.
Yeah, let's not talk about current events.
And here's another. Did you ever
angry.
think about how the fact that we have a whole department of history in our colleges, and as students in high school, you study history, don't you? Most college high schools, you have American history. Used to anyway. History. And history means that things move in a straight line. And there's a progression, isn't there?
Right.
And we even have there is a political group today, sometimes called liberals, but we also call them progressives, don't we?
Yeah.
Progressive. We're more interested in change. And now, of course, there are conservatives who kind of want to put the brakes on change and talk about the need to conserve. Yeah. But even conservatives are not absolutely against all change, are they?
No.
I mean, most of you guys here,
Want to change things back.
I suspect are
Change,
conservative.
constructive change, yeah.
But
We gotta kill our children, and maybe we don't.
But when you go looking for an automobile, you don't say, "Well, I think a T model Ford was much better built automobile than these new Fords." And I wouldn't have one of these new Fords. They're rattle traps compared to T model, right? You're progressive enough to say, I would prefer.
Model T Tesla. Model T Tesla. What to do? What to do?
You'll take the Model T. You'll take the Model T. Get me further probably on gasoline.
But I think that's one of the reasons that we have such a high level of depression and unhappiness in the world today is that we're being told that that there aren't promises of a brighter future. We're being told that, for example, we're already way down the path of climate change, and that the future is.
Well, but you see, that's a path towards disaster.
Right, exactly.
But and I suppose that the ultimate, well, I guess according to astrophysics and cosmology, the sun ultimately will burn out, right? And ultimately the universe, this Earth,
A red star.
it becomes a red star. And I think the thought is when it will expand to cover the
Out to Mars, at least, I think.
orbit of the Earth.
Yeah, the Earth and maybe Mars, I think.
Increasing
Go that far.
Yeah, and it covers that.
A couple billion years, it's all over.
So according to the
I'm not gonna wait up
cosmology speculation
By science, we know
what's going to happen.
the
score in the morning.
This universe is moving towards an end, isn't it? And life on Earth, but it's moving towards an end.
God wouldn't count on our
Now,
society being around forever.
but
See,
but that's a novel. All of that idea of anything, of history of any movement towards either disaster or towards redemption is a radically different idea that was introduced into the thinking of humanity by the Jews, or by the. Now, this guy who wrote the book. He talks about this is a gift of the Jews. We see it as a gift of God,
Right.
given to the Jews.
Yeah.
But he's a little reluctant to actually say that
Thank you.
that God actually spoke to Abraham. But anyway, Abraham came up with this idea that he should leave his country and go to another country, and that God was going to make him a great nation, and that out of that there would come blessings for all of humanity.
Here, thank you. That's what I thought when I read this yesterday, was that he leaves God out of it, you know. The Jews came up with it, you know. No, it was God who
But it did come through the Jews,
He came through the Jews, but then,
and in a sense,
yeah,
it spread to the Western world, even the secular world, who no longer reads the Bible.
right.
And people who don't even know who Abraham was. Just about a half a cup there. That's fine. That's good.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good morning. Good morning, brother.
How you doing? Good to see you.
You remember people?
Yes.
Well, so these are extracts from the book. He says, and I think this is true, that all evidence points to there having been in the earliest religious thought, the religious thought of all peoples all around the world, the ancient world, a vision of the cosmos, of the universe, a vision that was cyclical. Everything just goes in a cycle. And if you, and in some sense, it kind of makes sense that if you look at our lives, there's, take sunrise and sunset, day and night, there's this eternal cycle. It just goes in a circle, doesn't it? Day and night. Sun rises in the sky, sun sets in the west, and there's night, and the next day there's day. And it just goes on again. Then there is life and death. You know, people, whether it's plants or animals, they grow up, there's life, and then the life goes back, and there is new life that comes. You put the seed in the ground, and then there's new life that comes out of that, and it just goes in a cycle. And there's even the cycle of the year. You know, spring, summer, fall, and winter just repeats itself over and over again, and that basis in life really kind of depends on that cycle, doesn't it? And that was the basis of all of that, was the pagan worship that you find among the Canaanites in those fertility cults. Because those fertility cults, which involved various prostitutes who were the priests and priestesses at the temple, these were prostitutes, involved invoking the powers of life to overcome death. And to keep the cycle going, because their lives depended on that. This cycle of life and death, and morning and sunrise and sunset and the seasons. This is our life, and we have to keep this cycle going. And that's really what we worship. And of course, they saw sexuality as the force that they experienced, the actual force, and that was what they worshipped, and that was the way they celebrated it. But if you look at even the religions of the Greeks and of the Greeks and of the Hindus in the East, and all the Asian religions, they were all based on the same kind of view that there's a cycle. There's no beginning and a progression towards an end. There's nothing like a view of history. The assumptions that early made about the world were all their essentials, a little different from the assumptions that later and more sophisticated societies like Greece and India would make in a more elaborate manner. And he quotes some scholar who says, man in time, that no event is unique. Nothing is ever enacted once. In fact, among the Hindus, there is this myth of the kind of eternal return, that the whole of everything, which may go on for 1 billion years, but eventually will come back. This is, you guys eating breakfast here this morning and not giving this talk this morning has all happened before many, many times, and it will happen again in the future many, many times. And it just keeps repeating over and over again.
The cycle of life, right?
The same and of course that's the view of reincarnation. You know, that your soul is just keeps being reincarnated in different animals, and you just come back in a different form. Now, because among the Hebrews, the Hindus, the goal ultimately is to escape this cycle and to become kind of a drop in the ocean of being, but to get so you don't have to come back in some living form and go through the cycle again. That's certain. That was the Hindu view of nirvana, that you can escape the cycle. But basically, that's the way everything works. Same individuals have appear and will appear at every turn of the cycle. And the Jews, he says, were the first people to break out of this cycle and to find a new way of thinking. Now, he doesn't he doesn't really point to the fact that it happened because God made a promise to Abraham about a future for Abraham and a future for his people. But that's, of course, that's the beginning of the breaking of the notion of the cycle. That God is going to do something different, and that there will be a future for this people, and through this people, a future for the world, for the whole of the world. But he's going to use this people to bring his blessing to all the world. And so Abraham, he even has to set out on a journey. He doesn't even know where he's going on this journey, but he's got a promise. I'm going to give you a land. Go to this land and I will show you. And he makes this comment. He says, faith, that is this faith in God that Abraham had, the author doesn't emphasize the fact that the faith was based on the fact that God had spoken to him. But he says faith supplants the generalized predictability of the ancient world. That the predictability that things are just going to go in a cycle. You know how, I can predict sunrise and sunset, but I can be pretty sure of the probability that the sun's going to set tonight and rise tomorrow morning. That's the predictability of the world. But faith is different, supplants that predictability with the possibility of real success and real failure, real happiness and real tragedy, that there is a real journey whose outcome is not yet. The outcome is somewhere there in the future. And Abraham looked for that. In fact, in the book of Genesis, it talks about the fact that they ended up back there in Egypt. And or it's in the book of Hebrews, where the author of the book of Hebrews talks about the fact that they had not, even when they had went back to the land, they had not fully reached their goal. The author of Hebrews talks about how the fact that they were looking that were looking for a better country. You remember when we studied that in Hebrews? They were looking for a better country like us. So we're looking forward to a better country than this, aren't we? And he says even the ancient patriarchs were really looking for something better. And that we're all going to inherit this. So the cyclical religion goes nowhere. There is no future. only the revolution of the wheel. Now, let me just, I'm going to skip ahead here. There were other things about the Jews, their law and the righteousness of God compared to the gods. Take the gods of the Greeks. If you ever read Greek mythology, you know, their gods are just kind of superhumans with all of the faults and failures. You know, they were envious, they were jealous, they committed adultery. You know, they were, in some cases, they're worse than almost any human you could think of. But the God of Israel, you know, is a God who's totally righteous. Well, there's one other point he makes here about this idea of the new. Israel invents not only history, but the new as a positive value. The new as a positive value. Among all of the peoples of the world before, so whatever was new would not have been thought of as really positive. You want to maintain what has been. You want to maintain the cycle. You want to keep it going. You don't want really to look for something new. It may seem trivial to remark that we could not even have advertising campaigns for soap commercials without the Jews, since soap commercials are always flogging new and revolutionary improvements. Now, you think that might be a stretch a little bit. But this way of thinking that there could be something better, and that we're always looking for something better, always looking to invent something better. Right? So in that sense, you know, we do think, you know, there is a better, if you ever hear anybody say there must be a better way of doing this, yeah, that way of thinking, there could be something better. That's what was radically different to the ancient world and the way people looked at things. Now, on page 5 here of this group, I've got this section called Modern Ideologies that are echoes or corruption of the Jewish worldview. That's my heading.
Wasn't one of the wisest of the nation of Israel? Didn't he say very clearly, "There's nothing new under the sun"? Didn't he lament that?
Well, he did.
He finally came around and said, "No, wait a second. Everything is beautiful," because
People sometimes get things wrong.
Well, the book of Ecclesiastes.
he was in a dark place when he wrote that.
The head of the patent office in 1899 came out and said they ought to close the patent office because everything has been invented that would ever be invented.
Well, there was
In 1899.
some time ago, somebody said, you know, that science had discovered everything that really could be discovered and kind of reached its pinnacle. But he said we cannot really imagine the liberation movements of modern history without reference to the Bible. The abolitionist movement. In fact, the abolition of slavery, the trend or the promotion of the abolition of slavery was a definitely Christian idea. slavery was taken for granted throughout the world and has been taken for granted for centuries in all peoples and all cultures. That's just the way of life. In fact, Aristotle said that men are designed to be slaves.
Nowadays.
That's just the way it is. And it was among Christians in the Western world who came up with the idea. No, these slaves are human beings like us. And we should abolish slavery. We should do something different than that has ever been done before. Just abolish the whole idea and practice of slavery. Now you're talking about progressivism. Now that was radical. That was a really radical idea. The very fact that they could conceive of such a thing is rooted, of course, in the biblical tradition. That God is doing something new. Prison reform movement, the anti-war movement, the labor, all of these movements are based on the idea we could have a better future. We can do something different that's better. Free speech, pro-democracy movements, and so forth. But if you particularly look at communism, Karl Marx was a Jew. Communism was based on the notion of a view of history, that history is determined by the economic relations among human beings, capital and labor. Those who own the those who own the means of production and those who have to work them. But in his view, there was something inherent in capitalism that was moving historically. He believed this was an inevitable historical movement towards the breakdown of capitalism, the revolution of the proletariat, of the workers, that would ultimately issue in communism, meaning you won't have these differences. We'll have everything in common. And the workers will be liberated from their bondage of being, hemmed down and taken advantage of by the capitalists. That's really his, and he believed that this was inevitable, that history was moving, and that there was a movement actually from the ancient agrarian world through feudalism, the arrangements in the Middle Ages to feudalism, then to the development of capitalism, then ultimately to socialism and communism. That's a very Jewish way of thinking, that there's a better world to come. But of course, in his eyes, it didn't have anything to do with what God was going to do. God was going to bring about this wonderful world, but it was inevitable within history itself, and of course, that human beings would ultimately bring that about through the revolution. This is, and of course, today, progressivism is very much a kind of biblical faith. The most radical Democrats who come up with the most radical ideas you can think of today, making the world, are intent on making the world a better place, right? That's very much a kind of biblical idea, that the world can be a better place if you start making all these changes. But that would, you would not have had, those of us who are very, very conservative should have lived before Abraham, and because in those days there would not have been any such progressives. You wouldn't have had to deal with them. Nobody would have ever thought of something different. Everybody would have believed. It's just everything's going around in a circle. Nothing's ever going to really change. There'll be sunrise, sunset. That's the way it is.
About every 50 years you have to give everything back.
Yeah, your Jubilee where everybody gets all their stuff back.
Get all your stuff back, or you get all your money back, or your
Get land back. That's the main thing. It's pretty progressive.
They really practice that much?
Oh yeah.
When I was in Israel, we went up to Cabaret, which is a kibbutz up near the port of Haifa, and in fact, it was right up on the Lebanon border. And I saw people living in this commune, and it was a different way of life altogether. The children were almost like they were not the parents' children. They belonged to the community, and they, from the time the kids were just little, they lived in this area with these teachers or the people whose job was to take care of them. But the family wasn't the family. The family was the whole organization. It was just a different concept altogether. They pull it off pretty well, I'll tell you the truth. They really do.
Kind of like the Church of Scientology.
Well, I'm not, the problem with a lot of these concepts is people screw them up all the time, but it was really interesting to see that operation. It was totally different than what we have in the States.
Well, look at the early church.
Yeah.
Look at the early church where all the Christians came together and they gave what they had for the common good and all that. Yeah, it all works real well until man starts organizing it.
Exactly. That man keeps screwing them up.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden the church has an organization and the church starts to get rich and the church owns property and gold and
And the Greek widows are being ignored.
Well, if you look at the Shakers, and there were other movements, that have been attempted. Really the only level at which sharing things in common ever works pretty successfully is the family. The mother, the father, the children. You share everything. I remember when our son got his first car, he was 16 or something, we bought this old Toyota. It was a rattle trap. But anyway, it was sitting there in the driveway one day, and his sister needed to go somewhere, and the other car was gone or something, and we needed to use his car. And he says, "No, that's my car. You can't use that." I said, No, wait a minute. That's everybody's car. If they need it and it's available, they had to understand.
Right, it's like, did you pay for your bed?
Well, for example, Daddy's car, we use Daddy's car for you too when you need it.
That's right.
Always have. We don't say this is Daddy's car, you never get to ride in it. We don't take you anywhere in it. You got to figure things out for yourself. You share things in common. You've got to have that kind of bond. I don't know of any other place where it's ever really worked for any period of time beyond the family.
It's like they always talk about the utopia, the perfect place. And they said, what's the breakdown of the word utopia? No place.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is no perfect utopia.
But we keep developing these visions, don't we? But that's part of our way of thinking. It's always possible to have something better. That's the way we think in the West.
Yep.
There's lots of disagreements about what would be best, that kind of thing. But we all kind of think that way, that things could be better.
John Lennon, he had his own opinion too.
Had his own one?
John Lennon, his song Imagine.
Imagine,
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. It's all out there.
Even though I think he missed the mark, but
By quite a bit.
yeah, quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what put a target on his back.
Between that and singing My Sweet Lord, which was Hare
The problem
Krishna.
is that we were given the goal of utopia. When you look at the Bible, there is a utopia, and that is when we get to heaven. Okay? So there is a place where there are no tears, where everyone's
Where righteousness dwells.
righteousness rules. The problem is when we try to implement that here on earth, you know, you've got somebody else other than God making the rules.
Right.
Okay. And they never do a very good job of it. You know? And that's where it always falls apart. Unless you have someone making the rules and establishing the order who is in fact God, who's perfect, who's righteous, who's merciful, right? Okay, who's just. Unless you have that, then trying to set up that environment here is never going to work, because the person making the rules and in charge is not merciful and unjust and unrighteous.
And you also have to have people who are part of this community whose hearts have been totally changed.
That's right.
And I don't care what community you get together, you're going to get together a community of broken people, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you're going to get together a group of where you may have many people whose hearts are heading in the right direction, and it only takes one or two in that organization to take advantage of that situation, and then all of a sudden things go off the rails pretty quick.
Yeah.
Okay.